Hello and welcome to Chapter 4, where we'll be talking all about neurons, how neurons conduct signals, and how they transmit signals at synapses. Essentially, how do neurons send and receive signals? So all that neuroanatomy we talked about, all those parts of the brain, those are all made up of individual neurons that are going to be doing the work, and those neurons build up into those structures. So today we get into the nitty-gritty of how those neurons work. And I start here with an image from Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who was a man who wanted to be an artist, but his parents pushed him to go into medical school. He ended up in medical school learning about a staining procedure that would allow him to stain neurons like this with silver, a silver compound, I believe. And so you could actually see individual neurons stained like this, and then he drew these beautiful pictures. So he ended up doing art in the end. And we'll see a few more of these as we go. But this is a neuron by Ramon y Cajal. And before we discuss how the neurons transmit signals, we're going to talk about the anatomy of the neuron, what makes up the neuron. This is technically in Chapter 3 of your textbook, but it fits better here, so we're going to cover it now. So we'll talk about the neuron anatomy from the outside in. So we'll talk about the outside features that you can see of the neuron. Then we'll talk about the internal parts of the neuron. We'll talk about different classes of neurons briefly, different shapes and sizes. And then we're going to talk about glia, which are the other part of your nervous system, other major part of your nervous system that are not actually neurons, but they have a lot of interesting functions. Your textbook has an image of the external features of the neuron that looks a little bit something like this, where it's kind of coming at you in three-dimensional. You're free to study this in the lecture slides or in your textbook if you'd like to. I prefer a simpler version that we'll show you in the next slide. Here's our simpler version, and this is sort of our kind of quintessential neuron. It's got a cell here with these branches coming off of it. It's got a long process like a wire here that's heading to muscle fiber. So this is an efferent nerve in the somatic nervous system, right? It's heading out to the external world, the muscles, and it's coming out of the central nervous system. There's a number of structures on here that you may be familiar with from Intro to Psych, so let's review them one by one. So these branches that are coming off of the neuron here have a branch-like name, and that is dendrite. Dendro is a root for the for tree. Okay, so like dendrophilia or dendritic are all like tree type words that you may be aware of. So these are like tree branches reaching out, and tree branches reach out for the sun. In this case, the neurons branches, the dendrites, are going to be reaching out for signals from other neurons that are going to be sending signals back in. So that's what the dendrites do. The dendrites in this case are coming off of this cell, right? It's a circular thing with a nucleus on the inside. You know what that is. It's a cell. So we've got the cell body itself, sometimes referred to as the soma. Soma means body. And so that's, if you see those terms, they mean the same thing. So you have the cell body, and in the center of the cell, we have the nucleus. Okay, the nucleus is where our DNA sits. You might remember from Chapter 2. Okay, and so we've got the nucleus of the cell body, and then outside of that are these dendrites, these branches, reaching out to other neurons. Next up, we're going to be connecting to this long wire, and it really is like an electrical wire running from the cell body to the muscle fiber. And at this fiber, you might know the name of, and you're going to get a real good hint right now, because as we approach it, we're going to hit the axon hillock. Hillock just means hill, and then the axon is the axon, right? So we've got a hill here where we're going to be connecting to the axon. This is where some signals from multiple places are going to kind of come together and then start to get sent down the wire. All along that wire, that axon, is this substance called the myelin sheath. This is a fatty substance that insulates the neuron itself. Okay, so there's going to be an electrical signal heading down the axon. It's heading this way along this arrow. And in order to make sure that that electrical signal stays strong, we have insulation. That's the myelin sheath. You're going to notice that the myelin sheath doesn't completely cover the neuron, that there are going to be these gaps. And we'll talk in a future video about why we have those gaps. As a preview, it's going to be so that we can reintroduce the action potential occasionally, so that we can keep it going. Okay, so there's going to be occasions where there's gaps in the myelin sheath. Those gaps have a name, and it's called, they're nodes, called node of Ranvier. This is named after a Frenchman who discovered it or coined the term, right? So these nodes are going to be gaps in the myelin sheath where the electrical signal can be reintroduced and perpetuated. Okay. This next box here is pointing inside the myelin sheath to the wire itself, just to be clear about what it's pointing to. So the wire itself we've already introduced as the axon. Okay. The axon is the name for the wire that's going to send the signal down the neuron, and then ultimately we're going to be sending that signal somewhere. In this case, it's going to muscle fiber. In other cases, it might be going to a new neuron, right? It's going to reach the terminal or the end of the neuron. And so we call these terminal buttons. Sometimes they're just called terminals. Sometimes they're just called buttons. Let's go with terminal buttons, okay? And this is going to be where the signal gets sent from that neuron to whatever it's innervating, in this case, the muscle fiber, to get it to move. Okay, so you should be familiar with these parts of the neuron. You may be asked to look at a picture, and if this is option A, label that what it is. Now, to be clear, the picture on the last page is a kind of typical neuron that you're going to see in textbooks. You probably looks familiar to something that you learned in Intro to Psych, but neurons don't always look like that. Here's a sensory neuron, for example, where we've got the sensory endings playing the role of dendrites in the skin. This is an afferent nerve being accepted by the central nervous system, and you can see it still has an axon and a myelin sheath, nodes of Ranvier, but in this case the soma and the nucleus is in the center of the neuron here, as opposed to here at the beginning, because you're not going to have a cell in the skin itself. So we're going to send the signal for a little bit, and then it's going to be processed here in the nucleus. So not all neurons look the same. We'll come back to this. So those are the external features of the neuron, what you can see, what's going on inside that neuron. And one thing to remember is that neurons are just cells, just like skin cells or heart cells or any other animal cells. And so all of the parts of the cell that you've probably learned about in some science class at some point are going to apply. So they have a membrane on the outside. They have a nucleus that has the chromosomes. They have ribosomes that we learned that the ribosomes actually read the mRNA, right? They translate, right, the mRNA. And then we've got mitochondria, which you might know as the powerhouse of the cell. This is why you need things like glucose to be transported into the cell so that they can power all of this action, and that's what the mitochondria do. There's a few things that are specific to neurons that other cells don't have. That is neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are things like dopamine and serotonin and glutamate. There's like 100 of them. They're molecules that get released from the neuron to influence other structures. So they can influence the muscles, they can influence other neurons, that sort of thing. We have these structures called microtubules. That's the name of the things that actually transport the neurotransmitters. So if I want to get dopamine down to the end of a neuron, I send them down a microtubule. And then we have these things called synaptic vesicles. A vesicle is kind of like a vehicle, right? It's a membrane package that holds neurotransmitters inside of it. Okay, so we've got neurotransmitters that get transported down to the end, and then they get packaged up in these little packages so that they can all be released at the same time. So I don't have to release individual neurotransmitters. I can release a whole packet of them. That's what synaptic vesicles are. Okay, so lots of normal cell features and then special cell features. Your book's got a figure that looks a little bit like this. It's pretty busy, but go ahead and study this if you want to see what it looks like. Visually, you can see the nucleus and the other cell structures up here in the cell body itself. And then you've got microtubules that are going to run down the neuron all the way to the end so that I can send neurotransmitters down. Those neurotransmitters are going to get packaged up in synaptic vesicles. You'll see these little packages at the terminal bulbs down here so that they can get released. These are neurotransmitters all up in those synaptic vesicles. As I mentioned before, not all neurons look the same. Not all neurons kind of function the same either. So some of them are going to be unipolar, where they've just got one cell body that moves in a direction out, right? Some are going to have a cell body that actually goes in both directions. Got multipolar neurons, where this neuron's going to connect to multiple things on the outside, and then you've got these things called interneurons. Interneurons are really just going to connect one neuron to the next one really quickly without having an axon at all. So not all neurons even have axons. Okay? So I'm not necessarily going to test you on these names, but just be aware that not all neurons are going to look the same. They're not all even going to have axons. And Ramon y Cajal, our artist from the first page, knew this. Look at all the various different structures that he found. Some of these are like almost all axon with very little cell body at all. Some of these have very large structures like this. These are neurons that you see in the cerebellum of your brain. Some of them are these like interneurons you can see there, where they've got basically just these processes out and very little axon at all, except for like one kind of coming off here. So we know for quite a while that standard picture of the neuron isn't emblematic of all neurons out there. So just be aware of that, there's a variety. There's also a variety of different kinds of cells in your brain. Not all cells in your brain are neurons. And in fact, about half of the cells in your nervous system are cells called glia. Glia had the name glia comes from a root meaning glue, because people thought maybe glia kind of hold the real things together. So you've got the neurons that are functional, and then the glia just kind of hold them together. But it turns out that they have other roles as well. We're going to walk through a few of those here. Now, glia are not neurotransmitters. They don't have, glia are not neurons. They don't have neurotransmitters, and they typically don't send signals, so there's an exception. Some of the functions they do have include forming myelin sheaths, so that insulating protection to keep the signal strong along your axon is helped by the myelin sheath. And there's a couple of glia types, oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, that actually form these myelin sheaths. The oligodendrocytes do this in the central nervous system, and the Schwann cells do this in the peripheral nervous system. They look a little bit different, they operate a little bit different, but they have the same function, which is forming the myelin sheath. Okay? So if you have an issue with these kinds of glia, you might have issues with your myelin sheath, right? And that can cause problems with sending signals. Two other types of glia that you should know. One are called microglia. They're little. That's why they're called microglia. And they have immune system-like responsibilities. So your actual immune system can't influence your nervous system very well, certainly not your central nervous system, because we've got a blood-brain barrier. So I can't send an immune system to cause inflammation in your brain. That would be bad, right? And so we're blocked from sending an immune system response that you might send to your skin to your brain. And so the microglia have some responsibilities, like the immune system does, for example, in cleaning up cell death, eliminating synapses or the connections between neurons that aren't forming correctly, and then helping with forming synapses in a way that's clean and neat and tidy, right? So they kind of move around and help to clean up the mess of dead neurons or poor synapses, which is really important actually. And then we've got these things called astrocytes, astrological, like stars, right? These are star-shaped, and they've got a couple functions. Number one, they can help with the blood-brain barrier, and number two, they actually do send signals. So these are some glia that, even though they don't have neurotransmitters themselves, or they don't function in the same way as neurons anyway, they can send signals across neurons and establish connections. Here's an astrocyte in action. Go ahead and watch this give on your own, but we'll kind of watch it happen a couple times through. You can see that you've got neurons on the outside here that are sending, see neurons, and here's the astrocyte in the center. A action potential happens, and the neurons send signal kind of in this chain, but you can see that there's a calcium wave running down the astrocyte that then is going to coordinate action. Okay, so you got a signal over here. The astrocyte is connecting all of them together so that they will then fire together. Okay, so instead of having to make a connection here, here to get all the way around in sequence, the astrocyte can coordinate that activity. So this is a really important function. We used to think that only neurons sent signals or coordinated signals, but in fact the astrocytes can have a role in that as well. So those are the parts of the neuron and the glia. So we've got our anatomy, we've got the pieces down. Next time we're going to talk about how this works, or how the signals actually get sent.